Hi, Jim Stime, aquarium design for Thank you.
Welcome back to LA Fishguys. This is our first official service visit on the big 400-gallon Bowfront Aquarium. I've got a few things I need to add, a few things I need to replace. One of the things I need to replace is this black knob, which is part of the canister filter that holds the pleated cartridge. From day one, when I started cranking on it, the end of it broke. I spoke to that supplier 2 weeks ago, and I'm still waiting for a replacement handle. The other thing that I need to do is install the Algae Scrubber. And I had this tray made so that I can use it to straddle across the open end of the wet-dry trickle filter. It'll also act as a collection pan in case that Algae Scrubber drips some water. I don't want it dripping into the cabinet or onto the floor, and this will help capture it and route it right back into the sump. This being that Algae Scrubber, this is the Santa Monica brand Algae Scrubber. We're putting this on there because if you're not incorporating some means of nutrient export, ultimately I think you're just going to end up with an algae problem. There's also a couple of corals in there that are starting to turn brown, so I'm going to replace a couple of those. And I've already added some damsels, yellow-tailed blue damsels, about 3-4 weeks ago, so we'll test the water today to see where we are in that whole cycle process. The other thing that I need to deal with is the water pump. I've always been a really big fan of the Iwaki brand, specifically the Japanese imported version of the Iwaki pumps. But I really have some serious concerns about its reliability. At the moment, if the power were to go out and come back on before the whole tank is settled as far as water level is concerned, that water pump isn't going to come back to 100% or full speed. And I'm concerned about that. What I think I need to do is consider adding a ball check valve. Now, I had mentioned adding a ball check valve to the water pump, and whether it's a ball check valve, a Y check valve, or a flapper check valve, essentially the check valve is a one-way valve. It'll stop water from coming backwards. In other words, while it's running, the pressure pushes the flapper, the ball, or the Y out of the way, and when the power goes off, gravity and the flow of water coming back down will force that flapper, that ball, or that plunger to seep back down and stop the water flow. I'm not a big fan of check valves, namely because they give the impression of fail-safe, and in fact they're not. Many times the ball won't seat, the flapper won't sit properly, or the little plunger won't go back into position, and they give you the impression again that there's some security there, and in fact there's really not. So the only reason I'm adding the check valve into the situation is to stop the water so that the water pump has no resistance as far as starting back up, and without that resistance it hopefully will allow it to start back up, because my concern is if there's a power outage that, let's just say it's a flicker of power and it comes back on 15, 20, 30 seconds later before all the water is settled in the system, that water pump isn't going to start up, and I don't know if the customer is going to be paying enough attention to catch that right away. And that water pump essentially is the heart of the system. In fact, my biggest concern is the lack of support on the part of the people that manufacture, import, or distribute the product. Because I've already gone back to the local distributor who basically got upset, threw his hands up in the air and said, call the company direct. we don't have the ability to solve your problems. And I kind of thought that was a little disappointing after spending good money buying a pump and then finding out afterwards the person you bought it from isn't going to do anything for you. In fact, what they actually did do for me was give me the 800 number to call the importer, which I think is on the East Coast. And when I did call there, I got some fellow who, I don't remember his name, but he just basically he said if I was waiting for some replacement pump to use while I was having mine evaluated, that wasn't going to happen, quote unquote, which really kind of turned me off on the Milwaukee brand pumps. If you don't have a good support network behind you, you're not going to be successful. And we already discussed that back in Peanut Butter and Jellyfish with that doctor in Louisiana. Again, she had no support behind her, and without that, she wouldn't be successful. Well, the same thing applies with the water pump in any aquarium system. So let's go ahead and see if we can resolve that problem. I also want to test the water and see how far we are through the cycle process. So let's get our goods and get to work.
And there you can see our 400-gallon Bowfront Aquarium looking beautiful, sitting in its spot. There's a couple of corals there that are starting to get a little algae growing on them because of the proximity to the reflected light. That's actually a northern exposure, but there's enough reflected light that corals at this end of the tank are starting to get a little brown. We've got in the tank 10 yellowtail blue damselfish to cycle the tank. No, we're not using any special magic potions that cycle the tank overnight. We're doing the old school, tried and true, cycle it with damselfish, which is a 30 to 45 day process. Works for me, works for the customer, and I think in the long run works the best. We need to install that algae scrubber and remove a couple of corals, but the first thing I want to do is deal with that water pump.
So here's my concern. This is supposedly a very capable
Milwaukee 55, been running for less than a week, mounted on a towel to muffle the noise. There's the inlet in from the sump, elevated water level, elbow directly into the pump. The discharge comes up, it splits into two. A portion of that discharge goes into the UV sterilizer, which in turn goes to the underside of the tank. The other half of that discharge goes across to the refrigeration unit, and that too ultimately goes to the underside of the tank. The pump is now running. I'm going to turn it off so that I can place a elbow on this. And I will do this with the camera running. Pump is unplugged. Water is back siphoning through the pump, thus filling the sump up. And while this is back siphoning, I'm going to go ahead and attempt to plug it back in. And it's obvious that the pump's having a hard time starting back up. It is not running at full speed. My concern is if the power goes out and I'm not here to help it, this will never come back on. I consider it an unreliable pump. I'm now going to shut it off. I will close that ball valve, I will plug it back in, and at that point I would expect it to start back up. But you can clearly hear that it's not running at full speed. In fact, the water level in the sump is still continuing to rise.
Next time you're near Long Beach, California, take the time to stop in at Age of Aquariums, 2642 Cherry Avenue, just off the 405 freeway near Signal Hill. Age of Aquariums carries a full line of dry goods, supplements, and exotic equipment. Age of Aquariums also carries a wide assortment of living corals, coral frags, as well as fresh and saltwater fish, ranging from the usual, the unusual, and the bizarre. Age of Aquariums is located at 2642 Cherry Avenue, Long Beach, California, near Signal Hill. Open 7 days a week. Call 562-438-6252 or visit ageofaquariums.biz. Tropical Fish Hobbyist Magazine has been the authoritative source for aquarium keepers since the first legendary issue rolled off the presses in 1952. With informative articles month after month about the fascinating world of freshwater aquariums, saltwater setups, paludariums, ponds, and more, illustrated in crisp detail by the world's top aquatic photographers. TFH covers it all. And now, with subscriptions starting at $13.95 and a mobile digital edition you can take with you wherever you go, TFH is your ultimate resource for all things aquatic.
Hi there, my name's Jim Stime and you know me as the LA Fish Guy. Well, I also wear a couple of other hats. One of them is the jellyfish tank called the Jelly Aquarium, and the third is myfishtank.com. I offer an entire line of acrylic aquariums ranging from rectangular to hexagon, flatback hex, as well as the custom curve front aquariums. There's also an entire line of stands and canopies ranging from MDF to pine to oak with a variety of different finishes available. And the website is even smart enough that you can calculate what the freight and crate charges to your location will be. That's myfishtank.com.
Here's what's coming up in the future. I bought 3 very expensive exotic angelfish for the 400-gallon Bowfront Aquarium. A blueface angelfish, a maculosus angelfish, and a Navarcus angelfish. We installed an L2 model Algae Scrubber from Turbos Aquatic on another service customer's reef tank. This scrubber uses LED lights, and it's actually more of an old fish-only tank. And we're gonna see if we can bring down those high levels of nitrate and phosphate in this service customer's aquarium. And in this episode, we built our own version of an algae scrubber. Only it's the entire filter by itself. We have a possible 90-gallon reef tank sale in the works. And our friend Rick is talking about setting up his 180-gallon reef tank again. Be sure to come on back again for these and other exciting opportunities with more of LA Fishguys.
Gave it a second chance. Now closing the top valve, plugging the pump back in. Pump has now come up to speed. I'm now opening the valve on top of it. Pump is now at full speed. The unfortunate side is if I'm not here when the power goes out sometime, this pump will never start, and I fear that I will end up losing fish in the tank because of a unreliable Iwaki 55 Japanese.
So now, knowing in advance that there's no prompt support behind you in regards to the water pump, you should make it a point to have a replacement pump on hand yourself. Now, onto the check valve.
And you can see here I've incorporated a flapper check valve into the application now. What the check valve will do is stop water from back siphoning from the tank. And what I mean by back siphoning is typically the pump that draws water out of your wet-dry trickle filter or sump and sends it up to the tank. If the power goes out, that will actually become a drain or a return that will cause water to back siphon or run backwards through that plumbing, thus filling up the sump. And if you haven't gauged it properly or calculated properly, if the power goes out, potentially your sump could overflow and of course all that water would drain out onto the floor. What I usually do, because I don't trust and don't use check valves, is I will determine how much water is going to back siphon from the tank. I'll then calculate where the maximum running water level is in the sump, and as long as I don't exceed that, I know how much water will back siphon, and I've calculated that the capacity of the sump will handle that flow. But in this particular case, that back siphoning has caused an issue with the water pump. As you could see, the water pump wouldn't start back up again. And I didn't want to have to pull the pump off the system to send it into some manufacturer who already has a bad attitude and isn't interested in helping me anyhow. So what I did was incorporated a check valve into the application, which will stop the water from back siphoning. And the idea is, hopefully, that's enough to allow the water pump to start back up on its own. And my big fear here is if the power's out for 20, 30, 40 minutes, the water level's going to level off and the pump won't have any resistance because the back siphon will have settled down. But if that power were to come back on 20 or 30 seconds after it's initially gone out, as you can see, that water pump may not start back up. And again, I'm concerned that if the customer doesn't catch that, the heart or the main component in my fish system isn't going to do the job. And we don't want that. So we want to install some sort of checks and balances, some sort of reliability. So let's go ahead and unplug this pump and see if that check valve has solved the situation now. Okay, so there's the water pump, there's the discharge manifold, there's the check valve, and here's the plug. We'll go ahead and unplug that water pump. And at this point, there should be no back siphoning of water into the system other than what's draining out of the overflow at the moment. The pump has stopped. Let's just wait a few more seconds. Okay, now we should be able to plug this pump in and it should start up right away. And there it did. So it goes to show that putting that check valve in there solved my particular problem. The real question I have is why could an Iwaki 55, which is a pretty strong pump, not start back up with that gravity flow back siphon? But anyhow. Okay, so here is our sump, the opened end of the wet-dry trickle filter. There's the protein skimmer, and I've got this wide open area here. We're going to place that algae scrubber right across here. I had this tray made so that it'll hold the algae scrubber. It also has a couple of ribs here at the end of it that'll help hold it or hang it onto the end of the sump at the far end. And the algae scrubber will sit right across here. I can see there's going to be one issue, and that is there's really no room for the homeowner to pour his replacement water back into the tank. So we added another power strip to accommodate the electrical for the algae scrubber, which is now sitting in its tray, straddling the open end of the wet-dry trickle filter. See the protein skimmer there in the background. I've got the lights on in the unit, and now what I need to do is hook up the supply line. There is a Rio pump. Where'd she go? The Rio pump right back down in there. That we're going to hook up, and that'll supply the water to the algae scrubber. And then it has its own drain or downpipe, which will probably do the gloop, 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 because I'm running 2,500 liters through there, but let's see how that works out. So let me get some tubing, and we'll hook up that scrubber.
So make it a point to come on back for part 2 as we install the algae scrubber and test the water to see where we're at in the initial biological cycle of this 400-gallon Bowfront aquarium system.